Lord Butterwell was renowned for wit, Miles Smallwood for courage, Sir Otto Hightower for learning, yet they failed his hand, every one. Maester Pylos to Davos Seaworth, A Storm of Swords, Chapter 54, Davos 5. Whether you love him or despise him, I find Otto Hightower a fascinating character thanks to the role he plays in the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons, and how quickly after his plan comes to fruition, he's removed from power. While Otto is not solely responsible for the Dance of the Dragons, which is certainly something I've seen suggested and put forward by fans, you cannot deny his part in the laying of the groundwork for it. He has this reputation as this great schemer, whose goal always was to get his blood on the Iron Throne. But when you really start to break it down, it turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. And while many fans assume that Otto has been planning and plotting for decades to this end, there is still a lot of vagueness as to exactly when his plotting began. From Alicent's marriage to Viserys, to Aegon becoming king, how much of this was intentional? In this video, we will be exploring the surprisingly complex character of Otto Hightower, his role in the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons, and analysing if his actions truly were part of this master plan to seat his blood on the Iron Throne. Before we delve into the concept of Otto Hightower's plotting and scheming, it's vital that we understand the context of his backstory and how this might motivate his actions, because there are some key aspects of this which can help us try and pinpoint when Otto began to set his plans into motion. From what we know, Otto Hightower was born around 76 AC and was a knight of House Hightower of Oldtown. He would become famous for not only his role in the Dance of the Dragons, but the fact he was handed the king to 3 kings, although 2 of these kings did remove him from the office at various times. He was the younger brother of the then Lord Hightower. At the very least, he was a second son, quite far down the Hightower succession, looking to inherit little, if nothing at all. It should be noted, however, given how incomplete the Hightower family tree is for this era, he could also be a 3rd or 4th son for all we know. The fact he is probably a second son will later become an important part in Otto's plotting and rise to power. Otto was considered a man of great learning in his time and was described as proud, haughty, blunt, and domineering. He was cautious, methodical, and ambitious, with that ambition becoming core to his character. He was resented and envied by many. We know very little to nothing about Otto's life prior to 101 AC, being he was the second son of House Hightower, hardly worthy of note. But in 101 AC, after the death of Prince Baelon Targaryen, the son and heir of King Jaehaerys, and his hand of the king, Jaehaerys called upon Otto Hightower to become his new hand. While we cannot say for sure why Otto was chosen, it is in fact heavily speculated he gained a reputation for his intelligence. Also, something to be aware of, when you take a look at the councillors and hands Jaehaerys chose over his reign, he often picked men of known ability and skill who would do a good job, rather than men based on prestige or rank. How the king learned of Otto is another matter, but given 2 members of the small council came from the Reach, and the Grand Maester likely spending a lot of time in Oldtown during his training, it is possible Otto was known to them. Now, unless you believe in the Grand Maester conspiracy, something we will touch upon briefly later, with how left field the choice of Otto is, it's hard to imagine Otto was actively planning the idea of his daughter becoming queen at this stage, during 101 AC. Thus it seems that once he got a taste of power being hand-offered, the idea may have been planted there. When Otto was made hand in 101 AC, he brought his wife and children with him to court, his 15-year-old daughter Alicent, and one of his sons, Gawain. By 101 AC, King Jaehaerys was an old man whom had recently lost his heir, Prince Baelon, and his beloved wife, Queen Alysanne, in quick succession, with all of this starting to take its toll on the king, who progressively became more and more ill, till he was practically bedridden. During this time, between 101 AC and Jaehaerys' death in 103 AC, Otto Hightower effectively ruled the Seven Kingdoms. This is commonly thought of as the point in which Otto's ambitions grew, and while his future plans might not yet be fully formed, there is some indication he was attempting to move some pieces into place. Often cited is the fact his daughter, the 15-year-old Alicent Hightower, became a common face around court to many of the lords and ladies, especially given she came from a great noble family and she was unmarried. Both being a Hightower and the Hand's daughter made her a tempting prospect for many lords, young and old, at court. She would be a worthy match for anybody. Yet Otto, oddly, didn't make a match for his daughter. Alicent instead became the constant companion of King Jaehaerys, whose health was failing. She fetched his meals, helped him wash and dress, and read to him. During the war of propaganda in the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons, the court fool mushroom suggests that Alicent did more than care for the dying king, but rather provided him sexual favours as well. Given the context of this claim, whom is making the claim, it does kind of seem very unlikely there was any truth to these tales. In the end, during the last weeks of King Jaehaerys' life, he sometimes mistook Alicent for his long-lost daughter, Sarah Targaryen. Jaehaerys eventually died the same year, while Alicent was reading to him from a book of history. The issue with the idea of Otto using Alicent as a political tool at this stage is, unless he could tell the future, having Alicent act as the dying king's carer provides very little tangible benefit in reaching those goals. Specifically, while it was clear that Viserys would become king, Otto, unless he somehow was involved too in Aemma Arryn's death during childbirth, had no way of knowing Aemma would die with her babe. Thus, King Viserys would then be in need of a new wife. Unless of course we factor in the idea of the Grand Maester conspiracy, something we will circle back to. There is a fan theory that given Alicent had one-on-one private access to the king, that she may have poisoned him on Otto's instruction. But there's really little to no evidence to suggest that that's the case at all, and it does kind of seem out of character from what we know of Alicent. Namely, again, unless Otto is part of the Maester conspiracy or can tell the future, there would be no benefit in him having Jaehaerys killed. If anything, Otto would lose some of his power, given the new young king would likely be much more involved in the ruling of the Seven Kingdoms. What Alicent's role here does is make her a respected and prominent figure at court, and helps build a reputation and support, which is never really a bad thing. Otto continued as Hand of the King to Viserys I, Jaehaerys' grandson, who was chosen heir at the Great Council of 101, succeeding to the throne in 103 AC. In the text, we get very little information about the kind of relationship Viserys and Otto had. We don't know Otto's exact age for certain, but he was born sometime around 75 AC, or just before then. Given Viserys was born in 77 AC, it means there could be as little as a 2 to 3 year age gap between the two. Thus, the mentor-like figure Otto seems to have been for Viserys in the TV adaptation of Fire and Blood, House of the Dragon, is not likely in the books. But being Hand of the King, and Viserys, while being a more involved king than Jaehaerys, was more of a relaxed and jovial king, still allowed Otto great amount of freedom in his role as Hand. Fire and Blood says of Otto that the longer he served as Hand, the more arrogant and power-hungry he seemed to become, with many lords starting to resent his access to Viserys, who listened to his loyal Hand. I would suspect it was sometime between 103 to 105 AC and Aemma Arryn's death that Otto did start to contemplate ways in which he could grow his own power base. It seems to be his desire at least. But in terms of actual plan or plotting, tangible actions, that's another matter. Because again, unless he knows the future or is involved in a plot to kill Aemma Arryn, Otto has no way of knowing what's about to happen and how things are going to play out, which in turn opens up the opportunity for him to make his move. Make no mistake, should Rhaenyra ever sit to the Iron Throne, it will be Lord Fleabottom who rules us. A king consort as cruel and unforgiving as Maegor ever was. My own head will be the first cut off, I do not doubt, but your queen, my daughter, will soon follow. Otto Hightower to the Green Council, Fire and Blood, the dying of the dragons, the blacks and the greens. One fan theory that has become more popular since the airing of House of the Dragon is that at first, Daemon may have been Otto's original target. Now, this idea seems to be based off a small bit of information from The Princess and the Queen and the Rogue Prince novellas, before they were reworked into Fire and Blood. These novellas have a handful of notable differences to Fire and Blood. For example, Rhaenys having silver hair rather than black. But in these novellas exists a rumour Alicent and Daemon had some sort of affair before her marriage to Viserys, with the text suggesting that this may be the true reason for Otto's dislike of Daemon. So how does this information fit into this fan theory? Well, the idea goes that given Aemma Arryn was unable to give Viserys a male heir, that in theory, Daemon was in fact Viserys' heir and not Rhaenyra, that Otto was placing Alicent in Daemon's sights with the intent of Daemon marrying Alicent, with the potential for Daemon and Alicent to become king and queen should something unfortunate befall Viserys. Daemon was married to Rhae Royce by this time, but just like in the real timeline, she could very well have had an unfortunate accident, making a marriage to Alicent possible. While I do enjoy this fan theory, the fact this information is omitted from Fire and Blood and the additional context of Otto and Daemon's rivalry and hatred that is given to us makes it seem very unlikely this rumour could be true. If the rumours about Alicent and Daemon from the novellas is still A. still canon, and B. actually true, at the very least, it explains why Otto hates Daemon, other than his fear of Daemon being a second Maegor the Cruel. It was said the longer Otto served, the more arrogant he became, and more lords resented him and envied his access to Viserys. Fueled further by Otto's bitter rivalry with Prince Daemon, who would join the small council as Master of Coin. The influence of Otto can be seen when he convinces the king to remove his brother from the office, and did so again when Viserys named Daemon Master of Law. But in the end, Otto came to regret much of this when Daemon was named commander of the City Watch, as this put 2,000 men under his direct command, and the prince thrived in the new office, which in Fire and Blood is said to have been what fueled Otto's fears that Daemon would become a second Maegor if he did in fact ascend the Iron Throne, fears he shared openly with his brother, the Lord of the Hightower. Thus why Otto backed Princess Rhaenyra's claim to the throne to succeed her father over Daemon, despite the decision of the Great Council of 101, which many believed had established a precedent that the throne could not pass to a woman. Viserys often tried to make peace between Daemon and Otto, but the animosity between them continued their whole lives. The turning point here really seems to be the death of Aemma Arryn during childbirth in 105 AC, not only leaving the king unmarried, but also without a son. Now in the book, it's not wholly clear why Viserys chose Alicent as his next wife. It is more likely than not that Otto had nudged the king in that direction, and that House of the Dragon's interpretation of Alicent strategically being placed in front of a grieving Viserys is not an unreasonable idea of what could have happened in Fire and Blood. Given Viserys dismissed the advice to not wed Alicent by the other members of the small council, does suggest that at least for Viserys, the match was not a political one. It's not an unreasonable position to take that it wasn't until Aemma Arryn's tragic, untimely death Otto really now started to plot and plan. An opportunity to further his family and his position had opened up, which he exploited. It's not unreasonable to think the plan involving Alicent and Viserys and their possible son becoming king then developed alongside. If you want to believe the testimony of the court for Mushroom, there were some rumours that Alicent had even been sleeping with Viserys before Aemma's death, which if true, suggests that Aemma Arryn's death was not the triggering point of Otto's planning and scheming. You could even take this line of thought further. Maybe, in this scenario, Aemma Arryn's death was always part of the plan. Could it be possible Otto had some kind of involvement in Aemma's death to make way for his daughter, who had already caught the king's attention? I think it's unlikely given the idea of the pre-existing relationship between Viserys and Alicent is a very suspect rumour. I'm not even sure how Otto could have played a part given the manner in which Aemma Arryn was killed, which is almost completely out of anyone's control. Well, almost anyone's control. Do them no violence, unless they resist. Such men as bend the knee and swear fealty to King Aegon shall suffer no harm at our hands, and those who will not are traitors, and must die a traitor's death. Otto Hightower, Maester Orwell, and Jasper Wilde. Fire and Blood, The Dying of the Dragons, the Blacks and the Greens. There is a very popular fan theory which suggests that the Maesters and the Citadel have been conspiring for decades to bring down House Targaryen and kill the dragons. This is a fan theory with lots of compelling evidence from across the whole book series, and it really does deserve its own video. When you specifically look at the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons, there are some markers that could suggest interference by the Maesters, playing both sides to create conflict. Now, for the record, while it's a compelling theory with some strong evidence for it, I'm still not personally 100% sold on it. However, Fans who believe this theory have built upon it by suggesting that perhaps the Maesters caring for Aemma Arryn during her childbirth allowed her to die during the process so that Viserys could then remarry, thus leading to the chain of events that caused the Dance of the Dragons. How Otto fits into it is quite simple. House Hightower rules Oldtown. The Citadel, where all the Maesters train, is also in Oldtown. Historically, there's always been a close tie between House Hightower and the Citadel, with many members of the house becoming Maesters. Some fans thus speculate that House Hightower was working with the Maesters with the direct intent to destabilise the realm. And if you buy that, then it's not a huge leap of logic to suggest they planned the death of Aemma Arryn alongside Otto to allow for Alicent to become queen. The Maesters looking after Aemma had a perfect opportunity to make it seem like a tragic accident. Also, consider this. If Otto is as intelligent and well educated as they say, it's possible he could have spent some time at the Citadel in his youth. But my biggest issue with this idea is that it almost requires Otto to have not been aware of the full extent of the Maesters' plans, given his own blood would now be that of House Targaryen. On a personal level, Otto's goal here contradicts the final outcome the Maesters are going for, the downfall and destruction of House Targaryen. You also have the bigger issue that this theory is based on a theory, one that isn't exactly confirmed or explicitly stated in text. But the reason I chose to talk about it is because it shows just how convoluted the series of events needed to be for Otto's planning and scheming in regards to Alicent and Aegon prior to the death of Aemma Arryn needs to be. Once Aemma dies, Otto's goal is to marry Viserys to Alicent. The logical conclusion to that is the birth of a child, likely a son who, via malpreference primogeniture, would be king. Otto would not just be hand of the king, but also the grandfather of the king. His blood, in theory, would flow through every king after him. For me, a big indicator that Otto's vision here starts to form much later in the timeline than many fans think, likely between 103 and 106 AC. It's ironic. He's one of the key people who backs Rhaenyra's claim to the throne over Daemon in the wake of Aemma Arryn's death, which then makes the claim of his own grandson Aegon much more complicated years later. Therefore, I suspect Otto only started planning the marriage between Viserys and Alicent after Aemma had died, and not necessarily right away. Not just because he's more than likely had no idea it was going to happen, but that his initial reaction was to back Rhaenyra's claim over Daemon's, something that would directly conflict with the idea of his own grandson claiming the throne years later. If that was Otto's endgame plan, it would make no sense for him to do that. You could argue his deep dislike for Daemon meant he would back any claim over him, which is valid. But even if Daemon is named heir in favour of Rhaenyra, as soon as a son is born to Alicent and Viserys, Daemon is no longer heir. So all the clues for me point towards Otto's plan really coming together shortly after Rhaenyra is named heir in 105 AC. Otto Hightower is a schemer, planner, and master manipulator who knows how to play the Game of Thrones. Prior to 105 AC, he clearly took every opportunity to advance himself and grow his own power. The fact he most likely didn't start planning the idea of Alicent and Viserys, and eventually Aegon, until after the death of Aemma, doesn't take away from any of that. As we've discussed, there are many parts of the lore that could point towards an earlier start date for the planning, which has led to so many wonderful fan theories and speculation. But when we take into account the tangible facts of the texts, it shows us that while Otto is this mastermind pulling strings to further himself, he's equally an opportunist. Circumstances beyond his control changed, and in them he saw an opportunity. He took that opportunity.